we know in the House and we think in the Senate that will support some continued movement of the licensing for Yucca Mountain. The Senate is also Lamar Alexander and Dianne Feinstein. They just marked up their energy funding bill this week, and while they didn't include any money for Yucca Mountain, there's an expectation there'll be a floor vote on it. They've also included money for interim storage. It's very possible that we may see a final legislation that includes a little bit of both and keeps the projects moving forward. The administration has decided, historically, the administration has handled defense waste, so waste left over from our weapons programs during the Cold War, and the civilian nuclear used fuel stockpile. We're going to dispose of it in a commingled state, so it would all be at Yucca Mountain. But the administration has decided that they're going to consider them separately, and they're looking at other facilities now, and they're going to try to move forward with a consent-based siting process. Why have they done that? I think to give themselves a little bit of running room to test this notion that rather than forcing a place to say you will take this, they'll try to, sort of like Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer painting the fence, try to encourage people to do it. And then there's a Nuclear Waste Administration Act that was reintroduced this year in the Senate. It would implement the recommendations of the Blue Ribbon Commission that the Obama administration put together to look at waste and not consider Yucca Mountain. There's some interesting things in there, because I think that regardless of where you ultimately site a repository, there probably has to be a different mechanism for the federal government to manage the back end of the fuel cycle. Because right now it's done directly through the Department of Energy, subject to the annual appropriations process, the whims of powerful members of the House and the Senate. There needs to be some professionalization of that, the management of the back end of the fuel cycle. So that's sort of the report as to where we are now. The next slide is a little bit more of a thought provoker to get people to think long term about waste. So currently now the legal limit for waste is 63,000 metric tons of used fuel. That's the legal limit for what you could put in Yucca Mountain if it was constructed and operated. And we are approaching that right now in terms of the fuel we have. It's not a lot, It's the length and width of a football field, about 30 feet high. So it's not, from a volume standpoint, it's not like vast. It's not a vast volume of material, but obviously needs to be handled with great care. If you look at for the remainder of the century, under the current approach, we use fuel once. I always describe it as, we buy a 12-pack of beer, we drink one, and we throw the other 11 away. Okay? And so we have, with the current approach, we have a fair amount of volume. If we continue at constant energy generation, so if nuclear, if we continue to produce the same amount of kilowatt hours per year from the nuclear sector as we do now through the remainder of the century, under the current approach, we would need 4 Yucca Mountains to store all of the fuel. If we were able to expand the capacity of Yucca Mountain, we're still probably going to need more than one repository. So that gets you into this discussion about recycling, closing the fuel cycle. We're not talking about it now, and it's probably not something we're going to talk about for the next couple of years. But constant energy generation, or even just maintaining, nuclear today is 20% of our electricity. If we, based on what the anticipated load growth is over the next 20, 30, 40 years, if we just kept nuclear at that same 20%, and if we do that, we're probably not doing much to address climate change. You're still going to need 9 Yucca Mountains under the current legislative limit, 5 even if we expanded it to larger. We're going to have to sooner or later consider whether or not we close the back end of the fuel cycle. which is getting back to what we were talking about before, why I think it's important for to have a management entity that has some degree of independence from the DOE, that has industry representation, that has representation from the university community and the R&D community, to really think through these long-term issues and get it really out of the hands of the civil servants and into something that has a little bit more autonomy, has the ability to spend the nuclear waste fund to manage things in the long haul. So there's still some debates that we have to have about nuclear waste policy that we're not having now, because there are other hotter fires burning in the nuclear realm, but it's something that we will have to come back to. And it's something that, as a state, if you look at the market in the long term and the people that you have in high school today that you're going to educate to work on things 20 years from now as a PhD, this is one of those. This is one of those issues. So again, this is I'm sort of trending to international now. And this is my preface slide by saying, U.S. electricity demand growth is you can see where we are now. We're going to be growing at 1% a year demand. It's not like we were growing in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And so if you think about the markets today, for the U.S. and the European Union, the OECD, most of the construction we'll be doing for new generation capacity will be to replace retiring plants rather than to provide new capacity to meet demand. But obviously the situation is much different in China, India, other parts of Asia and the Middle East. They are growing and growing rapidly, and the point is that really the market is as much international as it is domestic. And so we think about nuclear, we tend to think about nuclear in this country as a domestic energy option, right, to be considered against gas or coal or renewable. But the real activity here is happening off our shores, and I think there is a security argument to be made that the U.S. industry ought to be involved in this. Number one, to keep our own domestic industry healthy, but two, having U.S. involvement allows us to define the safety, security, and non-proliferation norms of the rest of the world in these growing programs. So, this is where the action is, and if you look at where the growth of energy demand is, and if you look at OECD, which we sort of fit in that little 4% slice of pie, all the demand growth in energy is going to come pretty much from the rest of the world, and so focusing. Nuclear is increasingly becoming an internationalized business, and I think that there are a lot of people that have these outmoded notions of U.S. versus other Korean reactors versus French reactors. I mean, what's happening in nuclear is what's happening in every other major manufacturing industry. Look at the automotive industry. Look at your car. The engine's made in Brazil. Components are made in Mexico, Canada, the U.S. It's assembled in different places. The nuclear industry is headed in the same direction. And electricity is really going to be, and I should have a source on this. This is the latest sort of Exxon energy report, the long-term energy report. If you look at the uses of energy, electricity is probably the fastest growing sector. Industrial will grow, transportation will grow some, but electricity demand is really going to grow. And you can see there in the non-OECD countries. And in the OECD countries, it's actually, there tends to be more of a downward trend as efficiency takes over. This one is interesting because, we're sort of comforted by the notion that we have all of the shale gas in the U.S. and anytime we need a capacity addition, we can just put a natural gas plant in. The rest of the world doesn't have that luxury. The rest of the world does not have shale gas reserves the way that we do. So they're going to be looking for different energy sources. Nuclear is going to play more of a role in the rest of the world because they don't have this resource the same way we do. This is the IAEA does an annual projection of where they think the nuclear power capacity is expected to expand by 2015. This projection is never a profile in courage, right? The low end is 41 and the top end is 720. They basically might as well just say, you know what, we have no idea, right? So the question is, where are things going to be long run? And everybody can come up with a number. I'm going to show you my number, right? A more hopeful number. So if you look at primary energy use today, this is all energy combined. It's represented in exajoules, which helps convert all forms of energy into a standard of measurement. The world today uses 525 exajoules of energy. We still have, somewhere between, a billion and a half people, or close to 2 billion people that have no electricity at all. So even if you just focus on flat energy consumption, that we add more people without increasing their average consumption of energy, you're still going to see a 30% increase between now and 2050. And if we just follow along the historical trend of energy consumption, we get to 925 exajoules, which basically gives the average person in the world the energy equivalent of somebody in Bulgaria, which is, it's more than a lot of people have now, but it's not huge. If we wanted to take everyone up to and have everyone in the world consume as much as we consume today, we basically have to go use 6 times the amount of energy that we are now. So taking the historical trend number, right, just assuming that the energy use grows the way that it has historically, I make a couple of assumptions here, right? So the growth is 400 exajoules between now and 2050. I'm assuming 9% nuclear. Now, why am I assuming that? Because in this country today, nuclear represents roughly 9% of our primary energy use. So I assume that energy use grows in the world the way it does in a developed nation, that we have some kind of outcome-based carbon emission constraint. Maybe I'm a little bit overly optimistic about that. Maybe we cook the planet, who knows? But that represents roughly 36 exajoules, which translates to 10,000 terawatt hours, which translates to 1.42 terawatts of installed capacity, assuming 80% capacity factor. That results in 1,421 gigawatt nuclear power plants between now and 2050. And for those of you that like SMRs, if you go 50%, that's roughly 5,600 SMRs plus 701 gigawatt plants. And oh, by the way, we only have about 9,000 workdays between now and 2050, so we better get moving. I'm not telling you that my numbers are the numbers, but if you want me to come up with, you can use understandable, not necessarily conservative, but historical inputs to come up with numbers that are a lot bigger than what most people predict today. Because you look at all the EIA projections and they're all like, well, there's still this hangover from Fukushima, we're going to put our numbers lower. But 10 years from now, I think that the story is going to be different. There's such a hunger for energy in the world. And if you think about our ability to provide that energy, it's going to help us with, and provide that energy in a clean way is going to help us take care of the planet. It's going to help us allow large numbers of people to improve their level of prosperity. It's probably going to have an impact on global security somewhere along the way. There's a lot we have to do here. So I'm trying to leave you on a high note to say that a lot of times when you talk about nuclear, it's not, the forecast is cloudy today, but I think it's sunny tomorrow, and I think we have to do it for all the right reasons. So that's I'll stop and be happy to take questions and engage in conversation.
And health, humanity is very important.
It is.